Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here for a Thursday/Friday Reads weekly reading wrap up here. I've got a glass of my homemade iced tea here, and I don't know if you know this, but in Canada, when we say iced tea, we usually mean what the Americans refer to as sweet tea. If you walk into any restaurant in Canada and order an iced tea, what you're going to get is a bottle of Nestle iced tea sweetened. Unsweetened iced tea is almost unheard of in Canada, but you can get it at some specialty coffee shops. Me, I prefer it unsweetened, and so I make my own. And I actually put some lemon in today, but I don't always do that. I am extremely simple, and when it's hot, I can't drink the hot tea because obviously it's extremely hot. We're actually in the middle of a historic heat wave here in Ottawa-Gatineau. 35 degrees today, feeling more like 42, and we're sort of in the middle of a streak of hot days that I guess is going to set a record for the most hot days in a row or something like that. You wouldn't think that it would get so hot in Canada, but a good portion of Canada, especially in Ontario, Quebec, has extreme temperatures. So it gets really cold in the winter, minus 20 Celsius, and then it gets really hot in the summer where we end up, sitting here in 35-degree heat with 2 fans running and hair up and a glass of iced tea. And so that's how I'm coping with the heat. But my iced tea recipe isn't really much of a recipe at all. 3 Tetley tea bags. I go for the strong kind. I think they call it the bold Tetley tea. The stronger the better. That's how I like my tea. I think that's a very Canadian way to drink tea too. A lot of Canadians, we don't tend to drink our hot tea even the way that they do in Britain or in Europe. Some people, of course, do milk in their tea, but a lot of people, it's just, straight up black tea, and for a lot of us, the stronger the better. So I take 3 bold Tetley tea bags, pop them into my Rubbermaid pitcher, boil up some water, usually only, I don't know, it's probably a cup or 2, enough to fill about a quarter of my pitcher. Dump that in there with the tea bags, let it sit until it cools down and the bags have steeped, and then I just put my pitcher under the tap and fill the rest up with cold water. Throw in some lemon, let it steep a little bit longer, take the tea bags out, toss it in the fridge, and I have enough tea to last me day and a half because I have a bit of a tea addiction. So this one actually has fresh lemon in it this time, but quite often it's just the straight tea, and that is how I drink my tea. That is how I stay cool, in addition to water here. So I did do a bit of reading this week finally. I read Karamo's biography that came out last year, I believe. When I left my old team at work, they had given me an $85 Chapters gift card, and so I bought the paperback release of his book with part of that gift card. Now, I had previously read Tan France's biography as well as Jonathan Van Ness's biographies. I'm a big Queer Eye fan. My friends and I were all Queer Eye fans. And so I was looking forward to getting to this one. The only one I haven't read so far is Bobby's biography. I did flip through Anthony's cookbook. Interestingly enough, he has roots in Quebec and Montreal. And I did get the chance to see Anthony when he came through Ottawa earlier this year in March, just before the pandemic. But yeah, I had been wanting to read this one for a while. It was interesting to learn a bit about his life. The cast of Queer Eye, they're such positive, happy people, at least in front of the media and on the show. And so you wouldn't think that they would have had much of a difficult life, but in reading their biographies, you find that most of them did go through a bit of hell. and he talks about discovering that he had a son when he was 16, and he didn't know the kid existed until he was in his mid-20s. His drug addiction, cocaine addiction, struggling with abusive behavior, and then of course his eventual journey to be on Queer Eye and discussions around race and what is culture. Overall, just an enjoyable book to read, and this arrived on Monday, and I thought I would just open it up, read a couple chapters before bed. Completely lost track of time. Next thing I know, it's 12:30 in the morning, and I'd finished the book. So definitely a good read if you're a fan of Queer Eye. And Karamu is the culture expert on Queer Eye. So I've also been reading Radical Wordsworth on audiobook. I have an Audible subscription that I intermittently cancel and resubscribe to, and I had come across a copy of the London Review of Books earlier this week. Actually, I think it was more like late last week, over the weekend. And I was reading through that, saw this title, was intrigued by it because although I'm not a big poetry person, when I do want to read poetry, Wordsworth is who I go to, and I was quite taken with The Prelude when I first read it in an undergraduate English course a few years back. And so this one sounded quite interesting, and I had an Audible credit, so I went and I purchased it. It's called Radical Wordsworth, and the author is Jonathan Bell, I believe. I didn't write that very well. I quickly jotted down the author and title before I started filming because the book itself is in the Audible app on my phone, and I film with my phone. But it's called Radical Wordsworth, and I quite like it so far. I'm about 4 chapters in. We're still mostly in his childhood, hearing about how first his mother died and then his father died, and how those early events in his childhood and things that he saw and did in his childhood quite likely shaped his poetry. And it is quite interesting in that regard to see the author draw conclusions, draw parallels between things he did in his own childhood and the things that appeared within his poem, especially within The Prelude. So that's an interesting book that I'm slowly working my way through. And then I'm also reading Boswell's Life of Johnson, and I'm looking around me here, but I don't see the book. I think I left it in the bedroom. But I'm about 170 pages into that, slowly working my way through that, enjoying the videos that others are making as they read through that. And I was surprised at just how many primary sources and direct quotations and passages of Johnson's poetry that Boswell has inserted into this text, as well as by how much of a role Boswell himself takes in the text. Instead of being what we would think of as a straight up biography, it's a sort of writing style where Boswell is telling us the life of Johnson through his own eyes. So he's saying, I heard this, someone told me this, I saw this, rather than what is often done as the author tries to pretend that they're being objective about the person they're writing the biography of, when of course everything is from their own perspective, especially when they're writing a biography of someone that they knew intimately. So I'm enjoying that as well. And that was about all my reading this week. I did not return to the Honoré de Balzac. I'm still just a few pages into the Vendetta. I may do that this coming week, I may not. Not really looking to put pressure on myself to do that sort of reading if I'm not feeling it at the moment. I will be continuing on with Life of Johnson this coming weekend and continuing on with Radical Wordsworth. And I may dip into, I found Elizabeth Gaskell's Ruth in a little free library earlier this week. So I may dig into that as well. We'll see. I'm hoping to do a buddy read of that with a friend of mine on here, but we'll see whether I end up starting that this week or not. Do let me know what you're reading in the comments below. Is it hot in your city? Are masks mandatory like they are in Ottawa? That was, something interesting that happened here this week. Our numbers in terms of daily new cases are way down, but on Tuesday, Ottawa Public Health finally said that masks were mandatory in indoor public places. I was already wearing masks anyway, but even though for the most part Ontario and Canada are doing fantastic with getting the case numbers down, it's odd that we haven't had masks mandatory up until this point, because on Tuesday masks became mandatory in indoor public places in Ottawa, in Toronto, and the GTA, and I heard that this coming week they're going to become mandatory in Kitchener-Waterloo, also in Ontario. So it's a good measure, but it just seems to be coming a little bit late. Obviously, it'll help prevent a second wave, or help to curb the second wave as things begin to reopen here. But we'll see. I did actually go to the dentist this week too, which was an interesting experience. Hand sanitizer, mask, temperature check on the way in. They had me gurgle with mouthwash before we even got started. And I was happy to get into the dentist and do something semi-normal, and they're a great dentist, so I was fairly confident that the risk of getting it at my dentist was pretty low. But interesting times, interesting summer here. I'm feeling pretty good this week, and yeah, things are good here. I hope things are good with you.